If you walk past the centre, not much has changed. The businesses are different now, but it's virtually identical to when it was completed back in 1998. Other than the front of the building, this is the only remaining piece that's noticeable on the outside that there was an IMAX here. This was the actual width of the auditorium and screen. People coming and going from the centre might not realise it, but what was originally there in that end of the building is part of Dublin's cinema history, even Ireland's cinema history. This was the first IMAX in Ireland, and there was absolutely nothing like it. This is where it all began. It all started with the Sheridan Group purchasing the land and beginning to develop what would become the Parnell Centre back in 1993. In November 1995, the centre opened and phase 1 of building was completed by 1996, which included the old Virgin Cinema, Century City Arcade, Virtual Voyages, Shooters Bar and Flicks and Strike 4 restaurants. IMAX would soon follow in phase 2 of building. At this point, you might be asking yourself, what is IMAX? IMAX back in 1998 was something completely different from the IMAX that's available today. In the current version of IMAX, you get a handful of scenes within a Hollywood blockbuster that were shot in the IMAX format, most likely the new digital IMAX format. Back in 1998, you were getting complete features, although educational in content, in the old 15 perforation 70mm IMAX film format, so an entire film on a screen that was larger than life. I mean, to say we were the cinema with the biggest screen in the country was a bit of an understatement. 62 foot high and 82 foot wide is just, it was absolutely unbelievable to walk into that auditorium. IMAX incorporated, at that time, state-of-the-art projection equipment that cost millions of pounds to install. The projector lamp was so powerful and reached temperatures so high, it had to be water cooled by a special system. IMAX cameras offer the highest film resolution in the world, and was developed in the late 1960s in Canada. IMAX 15 perforation 70mm film differs greatly from standard 35mm film, which was the cinema standard that audiences would have been used to at the time. Ireland's ultra-screen sensation was a fitting title, and simply put, IMAX had to be seen to be believed.
We knew something big was coming down the road. Obviously there was the large developments, beside the main complex, which was housing Virgin and Strike 4 and Century City, and we knew something big was coming, but there was no official announcement made. And I would say about 6 months into me working with the company, then the announcement was made that there was an IMAX coming.
I think what Eddie Rockets is there now, so that would have been the entrance to Flicks, and they just had like staff wanted apply to me, 17 applied, and we both got asked to come in weeks later. And at that stage, both of us were working somewhere else. We were like, I know you're grand. Little did I know then that within the space of less than a year, that I'd end up working in that building and have a huge draw to that building because I ended up coming back to it twice.
Certainly nothing like this had been done in Dublin before. It was a real first. And that's something that the Sheridan Group really prided themselves on. Everything, they always tried to do the first. So up to that point, they had the 2 restaurants, and obviously, the Virgin complex itself, as in the cinema. From that, they bought into this Cimex Virtual Voyages. It was a Canadian company, and it was pods that basically threw you around as you were watching, live action on a big screen. The customers were greeted at a reception area by a character, and effectively, I was one of those characters, and we had to perform as if we were space cadets, and we were now hiring for our next bunch of recruits. And it was great. I mean, nothing like this was being done in Dublin, and probably certainly not Ireland. And it was, it was really good fun. During my time in Virtual Voyages, I was made a supervisor. And then about 6 months into working with the company, it was mentioned that there was an IMAX theatre opening fairly soon. And would I be interested in joining that team? And, the opportunity to do something different and the lure of, even a greater pay packet was nice. So I said yes, and that was then the start of my IMAX journey.
The way it happened for me was I was working in the Irish Film Centre and I got a phone call to say that the IMAX was opening and they were looking for staff, for cashiers. And was I interested? And I said, yeah. So I went up and had the interview with Stephen Johnson and Fran. And I just said, at that time, I'd already done an interview for Virgin. And they were giving me all these tests to go through. And when I went in for the interview, I was told, oh, well now, Veronica, have you not been there, done that and bought the T-shirt? And I was highly insulted at this. So I said at the interview to Stephen, look, if age is a factor here, just tell me now and don't. He said, absolutely not. So I was quite pleased anyway. I got the job as, I went for a cashier's job, but I actually got a job as a supervisor. He said I was kind of overqualified for what I went for. So I got a supervisor's job, then I was later promoted to manager.
McCann Erickson were actually the marketing company that were involved, so they were based out of Northern Ireland. At the time, one of the biggest advertisement agencies in Ireland, and they were hired to help market IMAX. So there was vast amount of money spent on, on bus coverings, on rack cards, which are the little advertisement cards you see inside of buses, and darts. There was a lot of money spent on the big campaign to announce IMAX was coming. And likewise, there was no expense spared when it came to letting people know there was jobs to be had. Ads were taken out in all of the main broadsheets, all of the main Irish papers, and it was an open day. I think it was over 2 days, and effectively myself and Stephen, the general manager, sat down over a 2-day period, and we must have interviewed hundreds of people, just one after another. So all the floor staff, the box, the box office staff, the concession staff, the floor staff, were all hired over those 2 days in just intense interviews.
I saw the advertisement in the paper for new experience coming to Dublin, the Sheridan IMAX, and at the time I was working, I'd only just started getting into working in cinemas. I was out in the Ormond cinema in Stillorgan, working part-time. I saw the ad and I said, oh, I'll give it a go, might try something new and exciting in there. Soon after I got a response asking me to come for an interview in Strike 4, which was already established downstairs in the Parnell Centre. That's where I met with Stephen Johnson, who was introduced as the theatre director, and Francis Murray, who was going to be the general manager for the project.
That's how I found out about it. I was looking through the paper for jobs, and I seen an opening for for an usher. So I applied and I got an interview in Flick's restaurant.
So the operations director was a chap called Stephen Johnson. He'd come from the hotels background, very, very professional, really knew his stuff, was very customer focused, was all about the experience that was going to be created in Dublin. And again, he kind of inherited me. Because the owners of the company, because the owners of Sheridan Group had taken a liking to me, he was told, this is your guest services manager, the best of luck. And that's kind of how we started our relationship. So, I mean, I was in at the very start. So I would have been there when we were hiring all of the team. I would have sat in on all of the interviews. I would have been involved in picking the initial merchandise for the shops, what product ranges in terms of confectionery we were going to supply.
Well, I received word back soon after that there was a different position that Stephen thought I'd be better suited for, managing, considering my experience from beforehand. So he invited me to join Fran, and then I was introduced to the other managers, and soon after that then the first group of employees who would have been helping out with the setup. So we were based in Dominic Street in an office there for a couple of weeks. Met then with the marketing people, and we would walk around the corner, visit the site as it was being the construction was finishing. Go see the inside of the theatre before the seats were there. I see large steps up. And then was more getting involved in getting the organising logistics of the uniforms, stock, and so on. That all the staff kind of were able to help us with, carrying pick and mix up flights and flights of stairs to the third floor.
I was with Colin in the office, training up on how to sell the tickets and make bookings and stuff like that. So I was there for that. And lucky enough, I'd already done this over the Irish Film Centre, so it wasn't alien to me. I knew it. I have to say it was enjoyable. Enjoyed that part of it, but training up the staff. And
so we were just going around, bringing in boxes, bringing in stock. Just we were doing training on things and stuff, so it was a good time. We were constantly between the office and the main building, so we were getting to see the whole thing being built. There was a lot of detail had to go into it. There was a lot of different businesses that had to come in and install equipment, so there was a lot going on. Like,
I certainly remember there still being no roof on the projection for a long period of time, and that causing lots and lots of hassles from weather conditions, because obviously one of the last things that they put in place was the actual equipment, and they couldn't put it in while it was still at building stage because of dust. I mean, this was millions of euros worth of equipment, or pounds as it was then, and they couldn't take the risk of the equipment being damaged, so it had to go in at the very, very last moment. And for the longest period there was no roof on the projection.
So we were a number of weeks there before we were told, okay, we're finally moving in, and the offices were already up on the 4th floor.
The staff, we were all introduced to them, and then we put them wherever we thought was fit to, put them in the merchandise, which we had at that time, separate. And then we had the kiosk, or whatever the people call it nowadays, and the cash desk, the floor, all of those. It was all different areas. And wherever you thought they were best suited to, in your mind, you put them, Straight in with the staff and the... I think they might have had press showings before they opened to the public on the 6th. I think didn't they even show us run through the Everest for us one day, or the Living Sea. We were all sitting in the seats having a look at this to give us the experience for ourselves, And I thought that was a good thing, that we were able to talk about it then to people coming in. If they were asking what's it like, or
As far as I remember, it was kind of a soft opening. Let people just come in and explore the centre once they knew it was open. There would have been specific screenings organised by the marketing team for journalists and so on to come and experience the IMAX show. They wouldn't have probably seen one before unless they'd gone to the likes of maybe Madrid, London would have been the closest ones.
I was there. I was actually in the auditorium for the first night, so there was a lot of press. There was drinks being given out. There was food being given out, and the first showing on the screen was Paint Misbehaving. It was a 3D trailer, so we handed out the glasses and they got the first bit of 3D.
We got a little snippet of a cartoon, and it was a painter running around with cans of paint on a ladder, and just to see the audience reaction to this was incredible, because this was before mainstream 3D, and it was very impressive. I mean, for the early stages of 3D, it was incredibly impressive. It was the type where you were literally reaching out to touch the paint and what was floating around in front of you.
And then after that, Everest was on.
You remember what the first film was that ran?
Everest.
First film, John. Do you remember what it was?
Everest.
Yeah, so the first two films that we started with were Everest and The Living Sea. They were two of the highest grossing films for IMAX at the time. So IMAX was a real breakthrough in terms of cinematography, because the IMAX camera, which was a special piece of equipment for filming IMAX films, had been carted up practically to the top of Everest. So that in itself was no mean feat.
There was a IMAX team recording, and just so happened that it was one of the worst accidents that happened on Mount Everest at the same time. So they were able to incorporate that.
When we sat down to watch that, my God, I felt like I was in it. I was gasping at the top of it. I thought it was a fantastic film. It really opened your eyes up, the quality, the sound, the colouring, everything was perfect in it.
The Living Sea, narrated by Meryl Streep, music by Sting, which gave an insight into the ocean depths. And since they had the cameras, the IMAX cameras that could produce such stunning pictures, people were seeing images that they would never ever get to see on BBC or any of the nature programs, or were quite taken aback, especially with the sound It, you know, you felt as though you're immersing into water, or the waves were crashing over your head. And with the 6-channel sound system that was, you know, behind the screen, surrounding the screen, it was a very immersive experience.
And the Living Sea was the other one, and that was fabulous. All underwater stuff. It was just something that really opened people's eyes.
We opened, and initially it was great. You know, the first number of weeks, it was selling out shows left, right and centre, and we were completely unprepared for it.
I believe it was during the summer, so it was good. There was the shows are selling now, and there was full houses.
You know, nobody really knew how it was going to go. I mean, we had the expectation it would go well, and we had the expectation, you know, it would be well liked and it would be impressive and people would want to come along. But you know, we were even taken aback at that stage at how busy we were earlier on, and we were completely unprepared. I remember the first couple of days just absolutely pandemonium, especially at the box office. And this was before, you know, online booking. This was before, you know, kind of ease of ticketing. So it was a very manual process. So people would call in, we would have to manually take their booking. That would then have to be printed and then, you know, their name tagged and put into a box. But it was great. I mean, it was a baptism by fire. And, you know, after a couple of weeks, you know, the team of people, we worked out a system and it worked. And we enjoyed a fruitful couple of months initially with the hype. So the advertising that had been put in paid off initially. So those bus shelters and, you know, massive amounts of money that were spent through McCann Erickson getting the name of IMAX out there worked.
It was great at the start, but people were expecting more, like for the price in. They were expecting like full Hollywood blockbuster, but they were getting nature programs.
I think a lot of people thought it was bad value for money if you were bringing in a family. 2 children, 2 adults. It was working out quite expensive, and then having to buy their sweets and chocolate and stuff, ice creams at the kiosk, that added a lot to their bill. Coming out, when you listen to them, it was a different thing because the experience they were after having was fantastic and well worth it.
Well, the marketing team were very, very conscious of promoting this with the schools and the educational piece, because that's really what it was. It had the wow factor for people seeing a screen that big and in such detail. And then the schools were very interested at the start because we included the tour of the behind the projection room afterwards. So it was very, very well orchestrated to promote this from the start.
Regardless of the fact that the content was educational and, you know, it wasn't leave your brain at the door cinema, you know, and be blown away with special effects and entertainment, because it was educational. People were incredibly impressed with just the sheer size of the screen. I mean, I still remember to this day, the very first scene that would come up would be stars, and it would be a camera kind of searching around for focus, and then the logo would appear for the Sheridan IMAX, and the stars would come on the screen, and you would always hear the same thing, and it was always.
The kids loved it. The younger people loved it. Like,
when you got up and you did the speech before each show, and you told the crowd how long it was going to last for, and it was like, you know, it was a bit like working in the airlines. You know, you're an air hostess or something. You get up and you say, "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Sheridan IMAX Theatre," and then you explain to them what the film was running for, say 45, 50 minutes. They're always around that, no more than 60, and telling them where the exits were, and after the show there'd be a tour to the projection room.
The big part of that speech was at the end of each film we did a tour of the projection room, because that again in itself was a selling point. I mean, the equipment cost millions. It was massive in terms of equipment. I mean, the sound wall, just to produce the sound levels, was an entire array of amplifiers. So we would bring people up and wow them with facts about the projection and how it was so different and how it was so costly and what had made it so amazing.
So we took them up there and explained all about the machines and all that was going on, and they were all enthralled by that, you know, just to get that little bit of extra on it, you know, and they seemed to like it. Lots of them had more questions to ask, but you might not have all the answers, but you get them from the projectionist later and say, well, you know, such and such body asked this, can you give me any information? So yeah, it always went off very well. We even got emails thanking us for that kind of little thing at the end and all the knowledge that we all gained, which I've forgotten by now. But it was good at the time, and you felt like you were doing something nice for people. They weren't just paying out a fortune and seeing the film. They got up to see where the film was shown, and that was good.
So people walked away, maybe not necessarily being blown away by the film, but being blown away by the experience of this large cinematic, you know, experience. You know, the customer service elements, even the small educational piece at the end by saying this is the equipment and this is how it works. And we would actually talk. As we would bring them up, the projections would be setting up the next film. So he would be threading through the film, through the equipment. So you could actually talk through what he was doing. And, you know, it always grabs people's attention. You know, one of the things you couldn't criticise the Sheridan Group on was internal progression and internal promotion. When we recognised that there was somebody good in their role, if there was an opportunity to move them on up, it was absolutely taken. You know, a lot of the initial floor staff became supervisors or went from supervisor to manager.
We found fairly straight off that we were going to need additional supervisors. The management team had a lot of duties and responsibilities, and so we looked for help. So we looked to the staff members who showed great potential, and we progressed them onwards. So I remember there was quite a bit of competition between them through the interview process, and Terry was promoted to supervisor and took on that role.
I'd started in the September of '98. There was a rumour going that one of the projectionists was leaving, and I had said, well look, you know, I suppose I have a sound engineering background. That would be a nice piece maybe to add to the CV. The job offer came up. I made Colin aware and Fran that yeah, I'm interested in that. So they said, look, have a chat with Sean. He's the chief projectionist. So I had a chat with him.
They preferred to give the opportunity to the ground floor staff. They opened up the interviews, and a lot of the staff could see themselves working up there, but it wasn't everyone that was just one person that was successful. But he seemed to dive in there and enjoy it. Sean, he got it, yeah.
Shortly before Christmas, I was informed that the job was mine. Like, Sean Fitzmaurice trained me, but Sean was there for 8 to 10 months maybe not even, and then he went back to the States. Whatever shift Sean was working for those months, I just shadowed him along the way.
If we recognised that somebody had potential, you know, it was capitalised. You know, we made the best of that. When you were afforded those opportunities and you seen somebody who had the potential, you made sure that they were afforded the same. And there was great loyalty in the staff. I mean, there truly was. The turnover was relatively low. You know, people really enjoyed working there. They enjoyed coming into work. You would never really have massive problems with sickness and lates and, you know, and people, you know, taking extended periods of time off work. People enjoyed coming into work. Sheridan Group were expanding their portfolio. So the 2 sites that were earmarked were Bournemouth in the UK and then Belfast up north. And Stephen, in his role as general manager, was going to effectively become more of an operations manager. So as he started to move more into that overseeing role, my experience started to get a bit more hands-on. And then Stephen made the decision to move on. He had come from the hotel background, as I said. He was very well respected in that area and went back to that business. And then when his replacement, who was Paul Keeley, stepped into his position, I kind of kept then that kind of more operational role, and then I was told my new title was operations manager.
So everything was going really well from the start. I'd say initially the first problem we kind of saw was the length of time we had to show the same films for, because it was a long time from moving on then to Blue Planet, the Rolling Stones, which we showed let's say on a Saturday night, and it was the first feature length concert movie that was shown in that. There was a lot of interest in that, and even the film was so long that they had to have an intermission, which people got a chance to go downstairs to strike 4 and have a quick drink and go back up again for the rest of the concert. And slowly in time we were told about the 3D that was coming. We knew there was going to be T-Rex, a dinosaur movie, which, you know, coming after Jurassic Park, you know, there'll be a lot of interest. There was also Cyber World, Thrill Ride, more exciting shows. So although we felt it was what's coming next, how are we going to go with these films being on for so long, the quality that we were told the following films are going to be, we thought, yeah, this'll keep us going and just progress.
T-Rex did very well. That was a great film and the kids loved it. If you stand down in the hall when the children and the adults are going out and you just stay in a corner, you'll hear them all raving about it. And it was, for them, it was a fantastic experience. You got the odd child that came in, was absolutely terrified because they felt like it was coming off the screen. But it was ideal for children, and, you know, to see the way their minds worked. It was to get the glasses, and they're taking them off and they're hiding on their daddy's shoulders because they thought this was real, and you see some of their hands up. I thought it was a great thing altogether for the children in particular. But having said that, the parents loved it. They thought it was fantastic.
T-Rex was the first 3D movie that we got. When the 3D film came in, you had to make sure that they were plated correctly, because one side was for the right eye and one was for the left eye, so if you got them mixed up, you'd have the film completely upside down. So you had to make sure when they came in and you were making them up, you'd have to make up your right eye and your left eye. But the thing about it was, when you'd run it through your plates, if it's a start point for one, it should be the start point for the other. No, it was slightly off, for the illusion that when you put your glasses on, it brought the two pieces of film together. So you had essentially two prints, one for the left eye, one for the right eye, and that's what would run through.
Well, obviously, as the only 3D cinema in Ireland at the time, the operation of getting 3D glasses in, handing them out to customers, the collection of them, because obviously this is something new. It's commonplace now today. You can buy for €1 in any cinema.
I mean, this was before disposable glasses, so, you know, you had two options actually for 3D. One was just a standard polarized glass, which were a large, almost Deirdre Barlow style glasses that were in a plastic grey. Or else you had the shutter technology, and effectively, as the film was being projected onto the screen, a command was being sent to the glasses to effectively close left eye, open right eye, close left eye, open right eye. And obviously at a very fast pace, and that kind of just gave a slightly more polished 3D experience. But the glasses were incredibly expensive, and we had learned from other IMAX cinemas that were running 3D, they went missing, which was a problem. So we opted for the slightly lesser experience of the large Deirdre Barlow 3D glasses, for want of a better word. But we had a problem. You couldn't give them as a memento, although often people would steal them, because they were still quite expensive. I mean, I think they were probably something like, you know, like £20 or kind of £19 each. So it wasn't something you could just willy-nilly give away.
Back then, these were expensive glasses, but people wanted to bring them home as a souvenir. So we had the joy of trying to collect all these glasses and following people out to the projection room and say, "Oh, sorry, we need the glasses back."
At the same time, there was a health and safety situation in that you couldn't just hand out glasses again and again and again without them being cleaned. So what we did is we brought in a commercial dishwasher. So the type of commercial dishwasher you would see in a large restaurant facility or a hotel was adapted specially for 3D glasses, with its own special cleaning solutions to disinfect the glasses. And that in itself was just an operational nightmare. Because, you know, like any operation, you have to put a budget on things. So there was a budget set in terms of this is how many 3D glasses we would purchase initially. They were purchased, people started stealing them, the numbers went down and down and down, and it got to a stage where there was then a rush to wash the glasses as quickly as possible before the next showing. And it would literally be, staff would post themselves at both exits, like security guards, making sure hell nor leather that they got the glasses back. They would then belt it downstairs to this effectively commercial washing machine, run them through, and they actually went into racks like dishes, like a dish rack. They were spun through and then short of blowing on them to dry them quickly as quickly as possible, get them back out for the next show.
This was all a new process for any company over here, and I know they struggled a lot to try and condition this machine to actually wash 3D glasses where it might have been designed for just cleaning regular glasses. It was going through in a conveyor belt system, and I remember numerous call-outs. I remember at one stage it looked as though we were going to have to all polish the glasses by hand after every show and have them ready to pass out for the next one. So it was an interesting time trying to deal with the whole 3D glasses issue.
If anyone had known that there was a big commercial dishwasher in the back washing glasses after every show, you wouldn't believe it. And even now, when I think back, just the fact that that's what we were doing was just crazy.
I mean, projection was like in the old days of cinema, kind of in a way a closed off area that the projectionists ran things, they looked after things, and you didn't interfere with those things. You're ensured, they would ensure the film ran, and you worry about everything else. The technical manager, I suppose you could call him, who came over for the initial launch he was already establishing and using IMAX equipment before, Sean Fitzmaurice, and working in theatres over there, and he was a great asset, you know, getting the place set up, teaching the projectionists, because obviously there was no school for them to learn this. It was all hands-on, and to change over from 35mm print to 70mm, IMAX specific equipment was a whole new world to them.
So the projection equipment in the IMAX was unique in the sense that there was a 35mm film projector which ran reel-to-reel for adverts, and there was a 70mm IMAX projector also. The IMAX projector worked differently to a 35mm projector in the sense that film runs horizontally instead of vertically through an IMAX projector. So the film would come off the right-hand platter through the projector and onto the left-hand platter, and then would have to be rewound after the show. The sound system was also unique in the IMAX theatre in that there was sound on disc, which would have to be synced up to a time code with the film.
The discs worked very well. They were great. The reel-to-reel always ran. It was ran as a backup. That there was a problem with the disc, you could just flick from one to the other.
Sound isn't actually printed onto the IMAX film because the format's so large it takes up the full width of the film.
When we had the Rolling Stones concert movie, wasn't on discs. It was only on the reel. And it wasn't an issue syncing it up. It was an issue syncing up the second part. You had to have it bang on, otherwise you'd have lip sync issues.
I think one of the things I remember most about going into the projection room for the first time in the IMAX was the sheer noise of the projector. It sounded like a tank, to be honest. And after having worked with 35mm projectors and digital projectors after that, it was definitely one of the loudest projectors I'd ever heard.
It was loud. It was never going to damage our hearing loud. So the way, if you remember that room, if you were standing facing the IMAX projector, you had the 35mm beside it, and then you had the sound wall. Beyond that, we had a little office. We had like a little fridge, a little microwave, and we had our own toilet and wash hand basin. When you were in there, the hollow that you were in, it dimmed it out. So, you know, there was a different dynamic to every person that was there. You know, Sean was, I suppose, a geek. John was old school, you know, computers, don't need them. You know, it's just plug it in and make it go. Jim was kind of had done various bits and pieces. He was into his photography, he was into his videography, he liked film. So the opportunity came up from him and it was there. And then obviously I came along, and when he took Brendan on especially, Brendan was part-time. It was only to cover the hours to make sure that he had somebody that if there was not so much, there was no really absence through to illness, it was just a case of holidays and days off, that he had Brendan there.
So Brendan McCall, who was the head of Buena Vista Pictures, which was the distribution partner for Disney, had quite a decent relationship with Roy Disney. So that was kind of an extra thumbs up that helped us get that movie and get that kind of exclusive run initially. It was a big deal. I mean, effectively, one of the reasons IMAX failed in Ireland was that it was ahead of its time in terms of from a commercial point of view. You know, when IMAX opened in Ireland, it was mainly educational content. If you looked at the States and looked at IMAX theatres in the States, they were always associated with museums and educational type situations. So Fantasia was the first real dip into entertainment.
Yeah, there was quite a bit of hype here in the office, like, oh, we're getting a Disney film, and we're going to be, it was a joint premiere of the movie worldwide, and we'll have to organise a big party for this, and it was so everyone was really hyped up about it.
It was our first commercial film. The fact that Roy Disney was going to come over to the opening, it was an opportunity to effectively remarket the IMAX, because at that stage audience numbers had started to peter off. The footfall wasn't anywhere near what was to be sustained and expected. So it was an opportunity not only to bring something commercial, but to relaunch the theatre in a more commercial environment with something that people would instantly recognise. And it was like the first initial weeks of opening the cinema with Everest and the Living Sea. It was manic.
We later found out that the contract that we were required to show the film more or less exclusively for a number of months. So
our job perspective was we came in to run films. It didn't make the difference if we were running the same film one after the other or a different film. In one way, it made our job easier because we weren't lifting films off and lifting films back on. The one film was on, it was just run it through, rewind it, lace it up, run it through, rewind it, so on and so forth.
The launch itself was just great.
He came in all right, and he was very popular that night, and everybody was buying merchandise, ran out of the shop. And they were all buying the things and getting to sign them. And I even got the two, as I said, the two little things signed myself. But yeah, it was a good night, and it was great to see everybody having fun and enjoying it, and really not only the screen come to life that night, but the whole theatre did,
That night was a great success. It reinvigorated media about IMAX. It reinvigorated the Sheridan Group about IMAX and its potential, and it reinvigorated the staff as well, because up to that point audience numbers had started to peter off, as I said. We started to wonder, would we see those kind of that footfall that we had initially seen? So it kind of re-energized everyone. IMAX was the perfect format for something like this. It was the perfect format. Showed off animation in its absolute glory.
So I started working in the IMAX theatre in January of 2000, and I started right in the beginning run of Fantasia. I remember at the start, I remember weekends being busy at the beginning, and then 4 months is a long time for one film, and if you'd seen it once, that was probably as much as you were going to see it, to be honest.
By the end of its run, anyone who wanted to have seen the film had been to see the film, and which obviously was starting to have an effect on business across the board, because we were just getting known as, oh, that's the cinema that shows the Disney film that everyone was seeing.
It's a film you only want to see once, get the experience, as they say, of the screen and all this. It was a lovely film for children. It really came to life on the screen, and it was really, really nice. But I don't think they made that kind of money that they say they did, because it was there too long and it died a death after a while.
By that stage, multiplexes were becoming more common, and that changed the dynamic of film showing in Ireland. So films had, you know, previously run for a period of time, a long period of time. Now they were becoming, you know, short runs. You might get a month or month and a half out of a film run, and in some cases even less. Where IMAX, we were stuck with the same film prints for a long period of time. So, you know, the audience would get bored very, very quickly.
At that time, I wasn't overduly worried. There was so much else going on, and you know, because you had to keep up the standards in the cinema regardless. You had your responsibilities, duties on a daily basis, and that kept you occupied. Having the place stocked. There was also it wasn't just the concession stand, there was merchandising, the kids zone, there was the tours, the school tours that would come in that would need to be organised, the tour of the back of the production room, then afterwards, the logistics of getting numerous schools in at the same time, in and out of the screens. So the longevity of the film going on and on was kind of a background thing. It was more a case of, you know, getting on with the job, and a job that everyone in there was thoroughly enjoying and so on.
So yes, even though Fantasia was a welcomed relief of commercial entertainment in what was a commercial setup, you know, initially the impact was huge. It was sellout shows, a number of weeks of good footfall, and then it started to peter off and back to the same problem again of lack of content, lack of commercial content in a commercial environment.
From the time that Fantasia ran and we went back to running Everest, and I can't remember if we started running Into the Deep straight away. I know that we still had T-Rex, we still had Encounters. So it was trying to, I think at some stage, was trying to focus on the 3D to try and have school tours or colleges and people coming in and try and get the name. They were trying to re-emphasize the IMAX name, and then they were running Everest again, and it started to kind of go that way. You could see it. Like there were certain times where you'd say to yourself, you'd have the last show laced up, ready to go. You'd ring downstairs, what's the story? Oh, there's nobody in yet.
I remember shows not being played because there was no one there. So like you'd have a show at, say, 1 o'clock, and 5 to 10 to 1 there'd be no one buying tickets. So
an awful lot of time, effort and resources, I suppose, went into showing a film maybe for 2 people. I'm not saying that their money wasn't good enough or that the show shouldn't have been shown for them, but considering the amount of power and all of what went into the show to be shown, for 2 people was a little bit of a slap in the face.
I think that's what was most disappointing. So we had this, this kind of hope of commercial cinema through Fantasia, and it ran for a period of time, probably too long, and certainly, the audience's numbers told us that. And then we went back to effectively showing the same material again, which would have been, Everest occasionally, Living Sea occasionally, T-Rex.
But the product wasn't there, and due to, again, the contracts, we were kind of tied into not being able to offer the variety of films that people would want.
It was disappointing. Effectively, we were all waiting for the next big thing, and it didn't materialise. And I think in a lot of ways, I think that was a sign of what was going to come down the line, that effectively there was no way IMAX could survive in Ireland.
That's when the sort of demand for more product was sort of fairly noticeable. What else can we show? We've had Disney, and we've had 3D dinosaurs. What's coming next?
Huge amounts of money had been spent at the outset in terms of marketing IMAX. That would not have been cheap. I don't know what the numbers were, but I can tell you now, it was a sizable budget was initially spent on marketing. There was then a fresh kind of push when Fantasia 2000 came out, for obvious reasons. First commercial cinema for IMAX, etc. The fact, we were privileged to have the opportunity to show it here in Ireland. After that, funds started to dry up. The performance of IMAX was very, very below par, very below what it should have been. So one of the first things to get dried up in terms of budget and spend was marketing. And then we were faced with a situation where we were getting, slightly more entertaining 3D films coming down the line with the likes of Cyberworld 3D. But, as time went on, there was less and less money available to market the films. So just as we started to get slightly more commercial content, we couldn't tell anyone. The last number of months there were disheartening and confusing.
Well, we were being led to believe that there was thoughts, talks and whatever else to bring in fresher items to brighten up and to drive business, get the footfall much, much, much higher and create a viable business.
The opening hours had been reduced. The marketing spend was non-existent. The main stable of income was school tours from an educational point of view. So we had gone very much back to that educational content.
We cut back on staff just to keep it moving along. But the staff were brought, there was no need for them in the afternoon because we didn't seem to have much business. Children were in school. It was just, it wasn't feasible to do that, keep it open all the time. They were losing more than we're gaining.
At some point during the summer leading into September, I remember that hours were sort of cut and we began to open late, Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday. We wouldn't start until the afternoon instead of opening in the morning unless there was school bookings. And
yet at the same time, they were opening a cinema in Bournemouth and a cinema in Belfast. Now, logic suggests that they were committed to those sites at that point. Large investment had been put into those sites, so they had to follow through. And the hope was always that content would get better and attendances would get better.
Bournemouth was being planned and so on, and I went over to Bournemouth to visit the site as that was being done. The management team from Bournemouth was over in Dublin being trained in, so I would have spent time with those people explaining the procedures that we follow in Dublin, so they can bring that over and follow or adapt for their site. And then there was obviously the talk of the flagship centre opening in Belfast, incorporating the Odyssey Centre, incorporating the IMAX again, and the first ice hockey rink, for the first team. All this was being talked about at the time. So at that time, we thought there was great scope still with the company. And although we did have some issues with the longevity of the contracts and attendance was waning, there was always something coming down the line.
So it was confusing, to on one level see large amounts of money being spent in the UK and in Northern Ireland, while there was virtually no money being spent on trying to remarket IMAX here in Dublin. But I think at that stage, realisation had started to hit in for everyone that they were well ahead of their time, but you would also have to question whether it was ever going to be a time where a standalone IMAX cinema would exist in a commercial situation. If I remember correctly, I had gone on holidays for 2 weeks. I'd actually gone over to visit a friend in Canada who had worked with us in IMAX, Sean Nielsen. And while I was there, I was getting worrying calls from my right-hand man, Colm, in the cinema to say, I've been told not to order stock this week. What do you think of that? So when I was coming back from Canada, I knew I was coming back into a very changed environment. I flew in, if I remember correctly, I think I flew in on the Wednesday night or the Tuesday morning, and the first place I went was to the theatre. And I went upstairs to see Paula, who was the ops director at the time, to say, I'm back, and what's happening? Because, the stories I was getting from the staff were, it's not good. I was reassured that, that they were committed to the theatre. Times were tough. Again, you didn't need to be a rocket scientist to know that, but, and you were reassured that, look, Belfast is opening, Bournemouth is opening, we're very committed to IMAX and the brand. But, as I said, common sense. So I left the office, I wouldn't say appeased. I left the office thinking, okay, well, I've been told they're committed to it, and I've been told, it's a bad stage, but we're going to work through it. There was one very interesting question that was asked of me at that meeting, which was, if we were to close, what type of notice do you think we need to give the staff? And I remember my answer, and I'll never forget my answer. It was that, well, as much notice as we can, because they will be committed. I can't emphasise enough how much people enjoyed working in IMAX and how well everyone got on.
There was kind of some rumours over the weekend, like the Friday, Saturday, that something was happening, something was going to go down.
Although business was still ticking over, it felt as though there was something going on behind the scenes and kept very quiet. And I couldn't establish what was happening. The upstairs was acting as normal, but you just had a sense that something else was going on.
You could feel that in the air, there was something going on. We'd all these guys then coming in with their hard hats, and they were going around the buildings, and you knew something was going to happen, but you weren't quite sure what it was. You see, business had slumped because they couldn't get the films that they thought they were going to get. It just seemed to be a hold on everything, and what they had was run to the death.
The writing was on the wall, but it was being covered.
It wasn't an overnight situation. Anyone that was looking at the figures that were coming through the door, anyone who had a brain on their head knew it was effectively doomed. But then, other signs in terms of actual spend, in terms of confectionery. So, relationships with suppliers was starting to become strained in terms of, getting actual stock in the doors to make popcorn, and restrictions on how much you could order, per week were being put in place. And, you didn't need to be rocket scientists to say this is not sustainable. When you consider wages, insurance, rent, electricity, heating, royalties, and what was actually being taken at the box office, the writing was on the wall for quite a number of months. It was a question of what would come first, closure or a saving film.
Definitely the offices knew that it was going.
It became very apparent that there was serious issues. There's guys walking around in hard hats with sets of plans around the building. So I went back up again towards the end of that following week to say to Paula, look, seriously, what's going on? And I think this was a Wednesday or Thursday, I can't quite remember. And at that point I was told that they were going to close the doors. Now, unfortunately, the company had just done that in the past. There have been 2 restaurants where effectively one day the staff showed up for work and the shutters were down and that was it, the business was gone. And I was disappointed to hear that's effectively what was going to happen with IMAX. The same thing was going to happen. Even though I had said, just give notice. Everyone will work it. There's not going to be any hassle. But anyway, that was the line that was given, that, look, things are bad. They're a lot worse than we've been letting on. Again, you didn't need to be a rocket scientist to know that. And that Sunday would be the last trading day. And that Monday, the shutters would be down.
I came in on the Friday and I was told by Paula Keeley, don't say anything, Veronica, but when the staff come in on Monday, there's going to be no work for them. And I thought that was... I couldn't believe what she was telling me, that she was actually telling me to keep it quiet, not to say a word to the people we were working with.
So I went down and I remember Veronica was on duty and I closed the door and said, look, I'm not supposed to be telling you this, but this is what's going to happen. And through kind of the QT, let the word get out there so that the staff know. Because, we had all been together for a couple of years working together. We all got on incredibly well. We all socialised together. And I didn't want to be in a situation where people rocked up on a Monday morning to find the shutter was down and what's happening to my last paycheck. So the supervisors kind of took it from there. They went off, informed the team members. The sense was had to quickly go off and join a union. I have to say it was incredibly operational. The military would be proud of how quickly they manoeuvred to get themselves where everyone joined up to SIP2 within 24 hours.
a lot of the staff weren't in the union, and I said to them, join it quick, because that's the only thing we have to back us up.
And I remember working on the Sunday and being told that it was finished and we were closed, and that we should come back on the Monday morning for a meeting to discuss what was going to happen.
It was only on, I think I got a phone call on a Sunday night to be told, do I know the cinema's closing? And I was taken aback and I said, no, when? And basically we're saying, you know, as of now or even tomorrow morning. So it was quite a shock. So I made my way in first thing Monday morning and trying to find out what was happening. And slowly people were coming into the place. But we also noticed people with hard hats were looking at plans, and so okay, there's definitely something going on here.
And Monday morning, the staff and the supervisors were there before senior management rocked up, waiting in the lobby to have it out.
There was no provision for redundancies or anything like that, and with those sort of talks were not going to be entered into.
In the meeting we were told, we're not opening today, we're done. What about this? Like, you were at that meeting, whoever else turned up, and the thought process straight away from those who were in the cinema business for 20, 30 years were going, if we leave, we don't get paid.
What then transpired after that was the lock-in to the projection room.
And then we decided we'd have a sit-in, because up in the projection room was where the valuable stuff was. We knew they needed that to take it down to Belfast, or up to Belfast, wherever you like. And in there it was, they had their fridge and they had their cooker and they had their kettle and they had all the things that we needed to keep us going if we needed to be in there for a while. The
people who were on site that day made a decision to protest against the sort of treatment and conditions. We put a lot of time, effort and heart into the place over a number of years, and just for this to happen all of a sudden just didn't seem right. So we made the gesture of closing off the projection room with us inside, and until something was resolved, we were resolved to stay there.
We have to lock ourselves in and make ourselves heard, which was a strange scenario to find yourself in.
We only had one night and we got out the next day because we got what we needed. They were afraid the equipment would be damaged. So this is how we got what we wanted so quickly. So everybody was paid off what they were entitled to. No one was looking for anything more than what they were due. But it was just, as I said, people needed a roof over their head, they needed food, and it wasn't a right way to treat staff after the couple of years there. So it paid off. It was a good night. We had security coming up, knocking on the window, giving us in burgers and chips.
Now, in fairness to security were told, look, we're being paid to be here to make sure that you don't damage the equipment. We all know and respect you and know that no one is going to do anything of a criminal nature. We were like, no, we're putting our foot down.
They had been locked up in the room for a good 10 hours as negotiations effectively went on downstairs in the office with SIP2, Paul Keeley, I would imagine another few representatives from the company, in terms of how the hell do we get them out of the projection room, you know, for as little money as possible.
The head of security for the centre was quite aggrieved at the way we were being treated. So he ensured, although we were stuck up in the projection room, went off to the local fish and chip shop and bought food for everyone to keep them going. It was very much with our cause. Although it wasn't affecting, you know, his career, he was part of the IMAX group. And the following morning, a couple of the people in the projection room were asked to meet with a union representative and the current theatre manager to discuss what was happening and how it could be resolved. And again, soon after that, we were assured that an adequate arrangement was made and that we could leave the premises
you know, I think everyone knew it was extreme circumstance. You know, everyone was potentially going to get shafted with their last paycheck. And there was an opportunity to make sure that didn't happen, and a greater opportunity to make sure that there was maybe even some payoff in terms of a redundancy. Because everyone had, you know, the vast majority had been there over 12 months, so they had a legal right to something. So they all locked themselves in a projection room. I didn't take part in that purely because effectively I still had a role with the company, or at least so I thought anyway. And, you know, I still enjoyed my role as operations manager. You know, I was looking at the potential of Belfast. I was looking at potential of Bournemouth. I was incredibly disappointed, incredibly upset at the situation that was unfolding here in Dublin. But as far as I'm concerned, I had done my bit by making sure everyone was informed on the QT that this is what was going to happen. And you could have said to each one of them, look, we're going to have to close our doors in 4 weeks. I'm really sorry. But look, this is effectively 4 weeks' notice. And I would guess 95% of them would have stayed on right to the very, very end to closing the doors, to see it through, because they had all been involved in the journey from the very start.
The IMAX end of the centre was just completely boarded up with a wooden partition. I was allowed to walk through the whole building. The seats had been removed from the auditorium at this point, so it just looked like giant steps. And I remember we turned on the cleaning lights, and Brian was with me that used to work there as well, and we stood in the middle of the auditorium. I believe the screen was gone also. And it was just dead silence. It was just really strange, and it's just kind of sad, like the way the place had been left. We went up to the projection room, which was the viewing gallery windows at what would have been the back had been completely demolished and knocked down, I assume, to remove the projector and the equipment. All of the equipment was gone. The porthole had been knocked out into the auditorium as well. And it was just really strange to see somewhere you'd worked for, although I'd only been there 10 months, everybody really enjoyed it, and to see what had happened after a while of it being closed down, it was just really sad, really strange.
"16 years ago, people weren't ready to wait around months on end for the next new film out in IMAX. And the production of these films were huge. In the States, where the films were being produced for a different type of market, were only thinking of branching out into mainstream movies at that stage. The demand for those types of films just wasn't there as it would be, say, now, where IMAX films are, you know, commonly shot, you know, for everything from Harry Potter, Dark Knight, you know, even the recent Star Wars films have produced in IMAX as a norm. So unfortunately, I think it was the right thing at the wrong time for the wrong market.
Well, there was a lot of talk about that we were at the wrong end, but when we opened up, we did good business, so people knew where we were and they had no problem coming up to it. I think it was just the films were hard to get. They either didn't have the money to buy what they needed, or there's just a block put on them. And because we were holding on to films for too long, business just dwindled away. It wasn't who's responsible for doing the films, hiring the films, renting them. It cost a lot of money, mind you, but I suppose it's down to management really as well, you know, that they should be looking elsewhere, maybe see if they could get something better. We didn't, but our downfall was, I suppose, because we didn't do the run-of-the-mill films that they show in every other cinema. It had to be IMAX.
Advertising and marketing didn't push the business as strong as it could. If they had been getting a couple of hundred people per show, or even realistically a couple of hundred people per day, and get the right content, it could have run much longer and much better. And by now, with the likes of, I know we're going back a couple of years, but the likes of The Dark Knight, some of that been filmed in IMAX, that's a big draw, you know. And for me, going to see that film in the cinema, when it went from widescreen to full screen, straight away I was going, I remember that. I remember looking into how the film was made and seeing the big IMAX cameras and knowing what it was like to work with that type of film, and thinking to myself, Jesus, if films had been made back then with that, it would have been a completely different environment.
I think ultimately probably what happened to IMAX was we were probably ahead of ourselves in that if maybe it would have came a year or two later, there probably would have been more content and more films available. I think every film in its own right probably done really well, but when there was no new films and no new content coming, and we had to go back to the original run of films, I think that probably really hurt business.
There are several reasons that IMAX closed, and all play their part in various ways. Attendances is the biggest part. At the end of the day, if you're not getting bums on seats and you're not taking an income at the door, you can't operate. You know, it wasn't a bottomless pit. They could only fund, you know, a business that wasn't hitting the mark for so long. And then attendances have a knock-on effect. When you're not taking revenues at the door, it's hard to justify marketing spend. It's hard to justify continued royalties, you know, to IMAX. And then, you know, aside from attendances, if you don't have films that were engaging and films that were entertaining and that spread a word among people, you have to go and see this. You know, you have to go and see this film in IMAX. The only place to see it is in IMAX. If you don't have that, it's failure. It is absolute failure. And, you know, like I said, you know, part of me would like to think if it had been done 10 years later, when the likes of Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter's or, you know, Dark Knight were available in IMAX, would it have succeeded? I can guarantee you would have had intense couple of weeks of box office returns, but then it would have dropped off again because it was one cinema.
I think the thing that brings the whole story full circle in the end is that in 2012 Cineworld refit their Screen 17 with the latest IMAX technology and brings IMAX back to Dublin, and have run a successful IMAX for the last 5 years, which is probably what all of the original IMAX staff would have wanted, a successful IMAX running today in Dublin.
Well, I have to say I enjoyed my time there. I enjoyed the staff that we worked with. We had great fun. It wasn't all about bossing people around. It was just... I thought I was firm but fair with the staff, and I got on well with them. They might have other things to say about me, but I did enjoy it. It was a whole new experience for me compared to the industry that I was in. It was, you know, that was the run of the mill kind of thing. But to come into the IMAX, it was like a whole new world opened up. It was fantastic, and yeah, it was a very short time, but I enjoyed it. That was great, and I learned a lot from it. You know.
The management team were very good in terms of, you know, when I walked on the floor, I had no problem whether I walked under Fran, Colin, Veronica, Terry, whoever. Everyone just got on and done their job. We had a lot of fun. It was a fun place to work.
It was definitely a unique cinema. There hasn't been another one since, and we're 16 years closed.
Some of the people that I met within the IMAX, I'm still friends with today. It led me to meet people beyond that through the business that I'm still friends with today. You know, when I started working in IMAX as a general operative, I didn't think that within 3 months I'd be doing what would be regarded as not a high profile job, but certainly a job that very few people in the country would get to do.
I had a really good time working there. Met some great friends, still in touch with friends today. We were young, so we had good times. We were like in town, so there's a lot of going now, having the crack like.
For me, as I said, I look back on IMAX with great fondness. It was it came at a time in my life when I was, it was a change of career into something new. I mean, to this day, I'm still great friends with people who I worked with back then, and although people do slip away, it's just if you meet them in the street or that, it's like it's only yesterday that we were part of that special team that were involved in IMAX. It was quite unique. I know people who have met in the IMAX, worked together and end up being married to each other. So it was kind of a great atmosphere in there, friendly atmosphere. The social end of things, we didn't just work together, we went out together. Was quite unique, and I always look back fondly and always have talked about it over the years as one of the jobs that if it was still there, I hope that I would still be working there.
IMAX was unique in the sense that if you said to people, oh, I used to work in the IMAX cinema, it's always something people would ask about, and I think it's always something I like to talk about. I made friends there that I still talk to today, and even contacting people for this project, talking to people like that I haven't spoken to in 16 years, and everybody just picks up like it was yesterday that we closed. I think everybody really enjoyed their time there. It was unfortunate what happened at the end, but it's what happened, and nobody can change that. That's just part of what happened, and I think most people will probably look back at the good times rather than what happened at the end.
I absolutely look back on my time at IMAX with fondness. To be honest, my entire time with the Sheridan Group as fondness. And then meeting some really nice people along the way. I mean, we had a great laugh. And it was all a first. Everything was always a first. Whether it was 3D or just a large screen or whatever it was a first. And it added to just a good environment. I mean, it was incredibly sad to see the way it finished. I was very disappointed at the way the staff were going to be handled in terms of closure after everyone really putting their heart and soul into it as much as they could. But on the grand scale of things, that was a final couple of months in what was otherwise a really fun time, dealing with fun content most of the time, meeting fun people, socialising, and doing things for the first time. As I've said, washing 3D glasses through a commercial dishwasher. I mean, they're things that you don't forget. And, if I look back over my time in management, because I went on then to commercial cinema for a long period of time, and I think back at all the fun times I've had in that environment, IMAX stands out by far.
Because I was friends with Sean, and I would get a lift home off him when we were on a close, I would be able to go up and wait for Sean in the projection room, and that sparked my interest in projection and resulted in me going on to working as a cinema projectionist for almost 10 years after I left IMAX, working on 35mm and digital projectors, and it was definitely the thing that started my interest in trying to keep a career in cinema industry, and I think I have to be forever grateful for working in IMAX for sparking that interest.
The reason I would think that we were kind of ahead of our time, it was an exceptionally well run operation with a great team of people, just having to deal with things that were completely out of our control. And if we apply that to the modern day, we would have an exceptional IMAX cinema running in Dublin. Hello and welcome to the Sheridan IMAX Cinema at Dublin's Parnell Centre.
Let us begin.